On Spotlight today, we have with us a legend of sport, legend of rugby, Bryan Habana, who is currently in Sri Lanka for a 3-day visit. And I had an opportunity to talk to him. A very warm welcome, Bryan. Can you please explain to us what made you to come to Sri Lanka?
Tell me this little piece of memorabilia that I got to have at a point, but this very special trophy. I think, being a part of the mascot family and being able to give Sri Lanka a priceless moment in bringing this trophy, to the country for the very first time, and understanding a bit of the passion that rugby has within, particularly the school, school environment and club rugby environment, but being able to share the sentiments of, how special this trophy is. A very big year, and it being the Men's Rugby World Cup 2023 happening later this year in France. So a really priceless moment, to be a part of the mascot family and bring this very special trophy to this beautiful country.
The Web Ellis trophy is currently in Sri Lanka and will be toured across the country. So what can be achieved via this?
So I'm not in Sri Lanka for as long as this special trophy is. It's going to be here for quite a number of days, going to the various regions within the country, allowing people to get a glimpse of what it's all about. It's always nice seeing something on TV, but it's even more special seeing it in the flesh. And I'm very fortunate in that, having won it, I can touch it with my bare hands. Everyone else potentially needs to, have gloves if they haven't. But I think for the people of Sri Lanka, where rugby is an incredibly followed and passionate, environment at the lower levels, and letting them understand, I think, the role that MasterCard and Rugby World Cup want to play in, expanding the game, letting more people understand how beautiful the game of rugby is, and in so doing, giving them insight into what this really special trophy means, and in a very big year of it being the Men's Rugby World Cup, the impact that it could have in the continual growth of the game globally. And in South Asia, we saw what happened in Japan in 2019, how that culminated, in my opinion, becoming the best World Cup we've ever witnessed, and allowing those that don't know about rugby to start understanding it a bit more and give them a little bit of a taste of the values that rugby portrays. So I'd love to be in the country for as long as this little cup is, but hopefully that people get to experiencing and see it for the very first time and understand what what that really does mean.
You were a member of the 2007 World Cup winning team. Can you please describe us about that winning moment?
So, Chomit, I think one has to potentially go back to '95 and that first World Cup trophy win by South Africa in South Africa. And I think I was a 12-year-old boy and didn't really understand the game of rugby. I mean, my dad played rugby as a young boy, but because of the apartheid era, rugby was a very limited resource for him. And we then got an opportunity to go down to Cape Town for the very first time and watch the opening game of the Rugby World Cup, myself, my dad, and I got to witness the sport of rugby being played by men that was potentially seen as a sport of oppression in the apartheid era, but just seeing the culmination of that team go on. And I was very fortunate to be in the stadium on the 24th of June 1995 to see Joel Stransky kick that drop kick over, to see Nelson Mandela walk out there in that number 6 Springbok rugby jersey. And that was a watershed moment in my life, the inspiration of seeing how sport broke down barriers of discrimination. I was in that stadium on the 24th of June, and hearing Francois say that it wasn't for the 60,000 in the stadium, it was for the 48 million South Africans, really inspired a 12-year-old boy that didn't understand the game. And it allowed me to start dreaming, want to then pick up the game the following year at the King Edward VII High School. And I'd love to say dreams are possible, but when you start out, and I didn't have the best start, and my first ever game was for the 14G side, but to 12 years later then be in a position to be representing my country, be playing on the biggest stage at the pinnacle of our sport in the Rugby World Cup in France in 2007, and have an opportunity to contribute to the success of the Springboks becoming champions was absolutely phenomenal and truly priceless. There's a lot of sacrifice, hard work, effort and dedication that goes into being able to get your hands on this very, very unique and special trophy. And the culmination of that, I do say to a lot of people, there's a fluttering ray of emotions that happens when the final whistle goes. I think the immediate emotion is relief, because you've just worked so hard, put in so much effort and dedicated yourself and sacrificed and given up so much to achieve that dream and that goal. And yeah, the 20th of October 2007 is a memory etched in my life and my brain for all of time now. I've got to share it with a group of phenomenal men, and having become the first team to win this trophy outside of the South African shores for the very first time, to then come back and see the impact, to see young kids in the rural township of the Eastern Cape running a kilometre or two barefoot behind the bus. Yes, to get a glimpse of this trophy, yes, to get a glimpse of their heroes, but more importantly, to get a glimpse of hope, because it does unite, it does bring people together. It's absolutely phenomenal what sport can do, and for us as South Africa, it's phenomenal what rugby has done for our country. So yeah, it was really special.
The Rugby World Cup will be played again later this year. So what are your predictions? Which teams will come closer to the finals?
So in my opinion, I honestly believe this is probably going to be the most tightly contested World Cup we've ever seen. For the past 9 tournaments, you've probably had 1 or 2, 3 teams at most that realistically have a chance to win it. I think the growth of the game globally and the disparity is no longer so big between the North and the South. And if one looks at it, the rugby prowess is probably in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. So you look at Ireland, the number 1 team in the world currently, with the Six Nations going on now. They've just beaten France, who had a phenomenal year in 2022, winning 12 games in a row, beating all the top 10 teams. So in my opinion, any one of the top 7, if they hit the right note come Rugby World Cup and that 8-week period, realistically have a chance of winning it. Seeing what happened in 2019 from a South African perspective, incredibly proud of what Sia and his team were able to do. And I've really seen a massive shift in the mentality of the Springbok side. And I think the unfortunate thing is, because the draw was done 2 years ago, you can have 2 of the top 4 teams currently in the world not qualify for a semi-final. So between Ireland, South Africa, New Zealand and France, 2 of those teams don't go through. And that's tough because they realistically can easily all win it. Ireland are banging the door down in France, but I think you'd write New Zealand off at your own peril. But for me though, I think the South African team, there's been an immense amount of growth. I think the individual players that are probably going to be starting are playing an incredibly high level brand of rugby, which excites me. Jacques Nienaber has expanded his net, so there's quite a few youngsters that have come through the system. So I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is and say the Springboks definitely have it in them to win it, and I think can emulate what happened in 2007 and win that trophy back to back for the very first time.
So meaning we can expect a Springboks victory this time?
I'm holding toes and fingers crossed that it will happen.
You're very interested about the school's rugby culture in Sri Lanka. Can you please explain about what made you to be interested so much about the school's rugby?
For me, I was playing in a golf tournament 5 years ago now, 2018, the Icons of Rugby at the Buckinghamshire, and one of the guys that were playing in the competition was Mahela Jayawardena, who for me, I love my cricket and a hero in his own right and an absolute incredible, humble human being. I got to chat with Mahela, like, oh Bryan, I obviously knew, I was like, oh, I was a bit starstruck. I just retired, and Mahela was, oh no, he knows rugby. I'm like, Mahela, how do you know rugby? He goes, no, rugby is massive at schools in Sri Lanka. And I was like, no, man, it's not April Fools. What jokes are you lying here? And he's like, no, you don't understand. And he started showing me the clips of schoolwear rugby on YouTube in Sri Lanka, and I was blown away. I could not believe my eyes. And coming from a rugby strong country like South Africa, where it is almost like a religion for many, schoolboys and girls, and not understanding that in South Asia you had this enormous group of people that were so passionate about the game, and a lot of it has stemmed, unfortunately for me, from the All Blacks. And there's seeing the haka being done and seeing the portrayal of rugby, particularly from the way the All Blacks played, was absolutely brilliant. Then starting to learn about, there's even been some South Africans that have come to play for clubs like Kandy, gone on to represent Sri Lanka, and just understanding the passion that there is in this incredible environment, that if you don't know Sri Lanka, the chances, like me in 2018, of thinking that rugby is as followed, as passionate and as vocal as it is at schoolboy rugby would be non-existent. And then learning about it, and when I got a call from MasterCard a couple of months back to say we really want to take this trophy to Sri Lanka for it to become a priceless experience, I was like, there's probably no better place at the moment to do it, in a growing rugby developing country, to bring this trophy that allows youngsters all over Sri Lanka, not just in Kandy, not just in Colombo, to sort of get a taste of this inspiration, get a taste of that hope, and in so doing allow them to dream as big as they can possibly dream. So it is a huge honor and privilege, and a real priceless moment for me to be accompanying this very special cup and trophy to Sri Lanka for the very first time. And hopefully it does leave an element of hope, an element of inspiration, and portrays the values that rugby has. And who knows, we might potentially see a Sri Lankan team in the not too distant future trying to compete for a Rugby World Cup if what this is meant to do, it really does happen.
Since you are passionate about Sri Lankan schools rugby, are you planning on making a contribution to uplift the sport in Sri Lanka?
I mean, I'd love it. I think as those that have played the game, I think we have an incredibly important role in advocating for the game globally. Sri Lanka is maybe a little bit far from South Africa to have an impact, but along with MasterCard, who sponsor Kandy Rugby Club, and seeing the success of them winning 29 championships now, there is a potential that I could come back and sort of see what it's all about. I do think to create long-term sustainability, it takes more than just a fleeting experience, a once-off. You need to be fully ingrained, and I've unfortunately got quite a few commitments back in South Africa with my fintech company, and one or two other things on the go at the moment. So where I could possibly, I would love to. I think it is coming in and just seeing the raw beauty of this country. Very much like a developing market economy, there's a lot of struggles. We saw the political unrest last year, but seeing the passion with which so many focus on the game of rugby, hopefully that can be a catalyst for some phenomenal change in Sri Lanka. So let's not say yes or no, but let's hope that I can, at some point with MasterCard, come back and have more than a 3-day stint to see if it's possible.
In Sri Lankan rugby, we have the schools rugby, then we have the club rugby, and then the national rugby. So that is the rugby structure in Sri Lanka. So is this the same structure in South Africa, or is South Africa adhering a different structure in order to produce world-class players?
It is the same structure. So obviously you got schoolboy, club, and then South African Rugby Union that oversees the whole system. The sports ministry plays a crucial role of sports in general in South Africa, and from my understanding it's very much similar in Sri Lanka. I think the unfortunate thing, doing a little bit of research, is there is a lot of political and administrative volatility in Sri Lanka Rugby Union, which unfortunately then doesn't filter that gap between going from schoolboy or club level into the senior team, and that probably needs to be addressed primarily for sustainability on a long-term venture, to be able to make sure that there is proper developmental structures in place for the Sri Lankan open or men's team to then go on and achieve success. So seeing the passion at junior level, seeing the passion at schoolboy level, it is a little bit of a misunderstanding how that then doesn't translate into to the Sri Lankan team becoming a force, particularly within the developing market economies, and competing with the likes of a Japan, of a Fiji, and various other nations. They get to play at the Commonwealth Games, but it's one where it potentially goes very badly from a results perspective. So not 110% knowing the exact circumstances within the volatility around the administrative and political influences, but just seeing the passion and the manner in which rugby is loved and followed at a school and club level, one would hope that that passion, that enjoyment, that love for the sport can then portray into the values at a more senior level from an administrative and political environment. So I'm not yet to say what needs to be done. I think someone's got to start somewhere, and that's by having people that are pioneers and wanting to do their jobs for the right reasons, for long-term sustainability of the game.
As a professional player, What measures are essential for a country like Sri Lanka in order to compete in a World Cup?
For me, if one looks at what it takes to be successful, it's doing your basics extremely well, and incrementally, if you do the little things well over a long period of time, that generally leads to success. I think for Sri Lanka, it's getting the right coaches in place for them to understand how the game needs to be played. It's understanding the physical challenge that come with it, the right defensive things that need to be put in place in terms of the structure, the way you want to play, and almost play towards your strength, which I think is extremely important. So it's not going to change overnight, but having good coaches that are technically sound, having good equipment, having good training facilities, having good nutrition, there's many components of the game that need to be addressed if you want to achieve success in the long term. And for me, if the basics are done really well, so if you can catch and pass and offload and tackle, if you can tackle well, if you're physically able to dominate the collision, because rugby is a collision sport, and if you can't dominate that, if you're not physically able to, you're always going to be on the back foot. So making sure that your first phase is good, the platform is always laid up front, and whether it be scrums or lineouts, the restarts, the driving mauls, everything is laid up front. And if your pack can't withstand that force, then it becomes very difficult if you're constantly retreating. Having a great kicking game is extremely important in the game of rugby, but having that vision and ability to be able to play what's in front of you and make good decisions is where the game is won and lost on the bigger stage. So it's not a simple answer, but it's about having people with the technical knowledge and expertise in place to allow growth, but incrementally making the basics be done extremely well over a long period of time, in my opinion, will lead to success.
Looking at the physical stature of the Sri Lankan rugby team and its players, what do you think is the most suitable format for Sri Lanka rugby? Is it 7s or 15-a-side?
So looking at the current climate of both the 7s and the 15 format, both are extremely physical. You look at some of the players on the 7 circuit playing for New Zealand, Fiji, England, or Great Britain, Australia. They are not small, not small lads, and you just need to physically be able to compete with that. South Africa, from a 7s component or perspective, really, bats much more above their league, because we don't have the biggest, most physically demanding specimens, but there is a brotherhood within the South African 7s team. So I don't want to say 15s or 7s is more suited, because I really do believe, and you look at the likes of a Ches and Colby for South Africa, Gio Apollon was there previously, Brent Russell, Brayton Paulser, Kurtley Arnser is now knocking on the door, and they showing that it doesn't really necessarily matter what size you are to be performing at the highest level. Rugby is a very physically demanding sport, and if your body is not physically up for that challenge, you do get found wanting. So having briefly met a few of the Candy rugby team yesterday and seeing their size, seeing their physicality, I do believe whatever format of the game they play, if nurtured, trained, and given the right tools, they can be successful, whether it be in 7s or in 15s. 7s, unfortunately, is not for everyone, so your props and your more bigger lads probably won't be able to play. A lot of your forwards might not be able to play, and even some of your backline players can't crack the knot at 7. So there's no simple equation or answer to that. Rugby is a very physically demanding sport, and if cultivated on all the levels, both physical, mental, in preparation for nutritionally, in preparation for the challenges that rugby possesses, you could make a success of it. But there is not just one immediate answer that springs to mind.
Tourism is an important element of Sri Lanka. Do you find Sri Lanka as a fine tourist destination?
Hopefully there is an opportunity to come back for more than just 3 days, and I'm mostly inside buildings and not getting to explore the country. I definitely want to try a tuk-tuk on this visit. I've heard their driving expertise are some of the best in the world, so I want to try get on one of those 3-wheelers at some point in the next 3 days. I've heard about how beautiful down south it is, particularly if you're an amateur surfer, and the type of waves that happen there, so I'd love to see that. Getting to the National Forest Station as well to get experience. I saw the Lotus building, which is a incredibly impressive one. So might have to get up there to just see from a high scale what Colombo particularly looks like. I've been very fortunate to go to the Maldives, and that's not too far from from mainland Sri Lanka, which was probably one of my best holidays ever. And if being close to the sea in Maldives is anything Sri Lanka like that, then I can definitely recommend it as a tourist destination. I think the hospitality has been phenomenal, and very much like South Africa, I think the friendliness of the nation, the friendliness of the people has been extremely welcoming. It has really just not only receiving my flowers but lighting the candle when I got into the hotel yesterday, and it has been phenomenal in every way or form. And if only for that reason I would definitely want to come back to Sri Lanka, because the friendliness, the hospitality and the positivity in a country that does have problems like many around the world, but the people that are willing to go to the ends of the earth to make you feel as warmly welcomed as possible. So for anyone that wants to experience positivity, a ray of sunshine, and if you want to experience that, the Sri Lankan people are definitely at the forefront of it.
Thank you very much, Bryan, for sharing your thoughts with us. We had with us Bryan Habana, former South African rugby player and a member of the winning squad of South Africa at the 2007 World Cup. Join us with another episode of Spotlight. Thank you very much.